Part-I, the ashes of Nanking, December 1937. The city of Nanking is burning. If you were standing on the walls of the Chinese capital that winter, you wouldn't have seen a military occupation. You would have seen the end of the world. The smoke is so thick it blots out the winter sun, turning high noon into a permanent, choking twilight. In the streets below, the Imperial Japanese Army is celebrating its victory. But this isn't a celebration. It's a massacre. For 6 weeks, the discipline of one of the most modernized armies in the world completely evaporates. We don't need to recite the statistics of Nanking here, the 300,000 dead, the bayonet practice on civilians. You know those stories. But we need to look at what happened after. We need to look at the generals watching from the balconies. Lieutenant General Yasuji Okamura is watching the smoke rise. He is a man of order, a man of maps and timetables, and what he sees in the streets of Nanking disgusts him, not because of the morality, not because innocent women are being dragged into alleyways by the thousands. It disgusts him because it is inefficient. Reports are hitting his desk by the hour. Mass rape is causing massive anti-Japanese resistance. The Chinese population, who might have been pacified, is now fighting with the desperation of people who have nothing left to lose. Even worse, from Okamura's perspective, is the medical report. Venereal disease is tearing through the ranks. In some divisions, 15% of the soldiers are unfit for combat due to syphilis and gonorrhea contracted from the mass rapes. An army that cannot march, cannot fight. An army that is rotting from the inside, cannot conquer China. So, Okamura calls a meeting. The minutes of these high command discussions are dry. They are bureaucratic. There is no shouting, no banging on tables. There is just a calm, rational discussion about restoring order. They identify 3 problems. The random rapes are turning the locals into insurgents. The diseases are weakening the troops. The soldiers are stressed and need a release to maintain morale for the long war ahead. A normal human being looks at this list and thinks, stop the raping. The Imperial Army looks at this list and thinks, regulate it. They decide that the problem isn't the sexual violence itself, the problem is that it's uncontrolled, it's messy, it's taking place in public streets where foreign journalists can take photos. It involves unscreened, local women who might be diseased. So, General Okamura makes a proposal. It is a proposal that will destroy 200,000 lives. He proposes the creation of comfort stations. Think about that term. Comfort. It sounds soft, domestic, safe. It is a masterpiece of euphemism. It implies that these places are like USO clubs, where soldiers can go to drink tea, write letters home, and perhaps enjoy the company of a hostess. But Okamura isn't building social clubs. He's building factories. The logic is chillingly simple. If the army provides the women, the army can control the disease. If the army runs the brothels, the soldiers won't need to raid the villages. They can keep the violence contained within 4 walls, inspected by military doctors, scheduled by military officers. The first comfort stations are established in Shanghai in 1932 as a test run. But after Nanking, in 1938, the order comes down to expand the program across the entire theatre of war. This is the moment the crime shifts. It stops being an atrocity of chaos and becomes an atrocity of systems. Part-I, the budget of the damned. How do you build a system of sexual slavery? You don't use criminals, you use accountants. In the archives of the Japanese Defense Agency, recovered decades later, there are ledgers, budget requests, construction orders. To build a comfort station, you need wood. You need nails. You need tatami mats. You need condoms, millions of them. There is a receipt from 1938 for the transportation of ammunition and comfort women. They are listed on the same line. Strategic assets. The military creates a standard operating procedure for these stations. They draft regulations, hours of operation, 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. Price structure, officers pay more, privates pay less. Time limit, 30 minutes per soldier. Hygiene protocols, mandatory washing, mandatory condom use. It is clinically insane. They are applying the strict, regimented discipline of the Japanese military code to the act of mass rape. They even build different grades of stations. There are the permanent ones in the big cities, brick buildings, designated rooms, actual beds. Then there are the semi-permanent ones near the front lines barracks, hastily thrown together with plywood. And finally, there are the mobile units, trucks, tents, where the women are moved with the artillery, set up in the mud behind the trenches, forced to service soldiers who are hours away from death. But the most terrifying part of the bureaucracy is the medical corps. Doctors are the guardians of life. But in this system, the doctor is the mechanic. His job isn't to heal the women. His job is to keep the equipment functioning. They set up weekly inspections, not for the women's health, for the soldiers' protection. If a woman is found to be infected, she isn't treated with compassion. She is discarded or given sample 606, an injection we will talk about later. An injection that stops the symptoms but doesn't cure the disease. The architects of this system thought of everything. They calculated the square footage needed per woman. They calculated the ratio of soldiers to women, ideally 29:1, but often rising to 100:1. They calculated the price of a ticket based on the soldier's rank. But there was one calculation they struggled with: supply. You can build the barracks, you can print the tickets, you can ship the condoms, but a comfort station is useless without the units. General Okamura's plan required thousands of women immediately, and tens of thousands more as the war dragged on. Where do you find them? You can't ask Japanese women. The Japanese woman is the mother of the empire. She is to be protected, honored, kept pure to raise the next generation of samurai. You can't turn the daughters of Tokyo into sexual slaves. That would destroy morale at home. And you can't just grab women off the streets of Nanking anymore. That causes too much resistance. The locals fight back. You need a source that is controllable, a population that is already subjugated. People who have been told for 30 years that they are inferior, that they exist only to serve the emperor. The generals look at the map. They look past the burning cities of China, across the Yellow Sea. They look at Korea. Korea has been a Japanese colony since 1910. The language is banned. The names are being changed. The culture is being erased. It is the perfect hunting ground. But you can't just send the army in to kidnap 200,000 women at gunpoint. Even in a colony, that causes riots. That disrupts the rice production and the labor force. No. To get the supply you need, you don't use force. Not at first. You use a lie. You tell a starving family that there are jobs in the textile factories of Manchuria. You tell a young girl who dreams of education that there are nursing positions in Singapore. You tell them they will be serving the emperor. You tell them they will send money home. You wrap the horror in a recruitment poster. The architects in Tokyo have finished their blueprints. The budget has been approved. The barracks are being built. Now, they send the recruiters. The supply chain is open. And in a small village in Gyeongsang province, a girl is about to put on a pair of red shoes, thinking she's going to a factory to buy her mother a bag of rice. She doesn't know that the factory doesn't exist. She doesn't know that she has just become a line item in General Okamura's ledger. She doesn't know that she is about to enter hell. Part 2. The Lie in the Rice Paddies. The year is 1939. We are leaving the smoke-choked streets of Nanking and traveling 600 miles east, across the Yellow Sea, to the quiet, mountainous valleys of the Korean peninsula. It is harvest season. The air smells of pine needles and damp earth. In the village of Daegu, the war feels very far away. There are no cannons here, no burning buildings, just the rhythmic thwack of threshing tools and the sound of wind moving through the rice paddies. But the war is here. It's just wearing a different face. It arrives in a truck. A man steps out. He's Korean, but he wears the armband of the local police. He speaks the language of the village, but he holds himself like a Japanese official. He gathers the families in the town square. He doesn't ask for soldiers. He asks for daughters. The emperor needs you, he says. The factories in Manchuria are expanding. They need strong hands to sew uniforms. The pay is good. There is rice. You will be able to send money home to your parents. Look at the faces in the crowd. These are people who have been crushed by 30 years of colonial rule. Their crops have been seized. Their language has been outlawed in schools. They are hungry. And here is a lifeline. A 16-year-old girl steps forward. Let's call her Sunja. She isn't a statistic. She is a girl who likes to sing while she washes clothes in the river. She has a pair of red shoes her father bought her before he died, her most prized possession. She is wearing them today because this is a special occasion. She's going to save her family. Her mother cries, clutching her hand. Work hard, she whispers. Come back soon. Sunja climbs into the truck. There are other girls there. Some are excited, chattering about what they will buy with their wages. Some are quiet, staring at their hands. They wave as the truck pulls away, watching their village disappear behind a cloud of dust. They think they are going to a textile mill. They think they are patriots. They think they will be home by next harvest. They are wrong. The deception, the volunteer corps, as the Japanese called it, was the most successful kidnapping operation in human history. It relied on the innocence of the victims. It weaponized their poverty. But the mask begins to slip the moment they reach the train station. Part Ivy, the black windows. The train at Busan Station is massive, a beast of iron and steam, but it's not a passenger train, it's a troop transport. Sunja and the other girls are herded toward the rear cars. The conductors are not polite. They are shouting. They are shoving. The factory recruiters are gone, replaced by soldiers with bayonets fixed to their rifles. Sanja clutches her small bundle of clothes. She looks for a seat, but the car is crammed. Girls are sitting on the floor, on top of luggage, squeezed into the aisles. The air is hot and smells of coal smoke and unwashed bodies. But the first moment of true terror happens when the train starts moving. Sunja tries to look out the window to see the ocean, to see her country one last time. She can't. The windows have been painted black. Panic ripples through the car like an electric current. "Where are we going?" a girl asks a passing guard. "Shut up," he snaps. The butt of his rifle hits the floor. Clack. The journey lasts for days. They are given barely enough water to survive. No food. The bucket in the corner overflows. The chatter about wages and new clothes has died. Now, there is only the rhythmic clack, clack, clack of the wheels and the sound of sobbing in the dark. They cross the border into China, then deeper, into the war zone. When the train finally stops, it isn't at a factory. The doors slide open. The light is blinding. Sunja stumbles out, her legs stiff, squinting against the sun. She expects to see smokestacks. She expects to see sewing machines. Instead, she sees barbed wire. She sees rows of wooden shacks, hastily built, surrounding a dusty courtyard. She sees soldiers, hundreds of them, milling about, smoking cigarettes, staring at the new arrivals with a look that makes her stomach turn. It's a look of hunger, not for food. A Japanese officer steps onto a crate. He doesn't talk about sewing uniforms. He doesn't talk about the emperor. "You are now the property of the Imperial Army," he barks. "Your duty is to comfort the soldiers who are fighting for Asia. You will work hard. You will not complain. If you try to run, you will be shot." The silence that follows is absolute. It is the silence of a world shattering. Sunja looks down at her red shoes. They are covered in dust. The red is barely visible anymore. Part V, the branding. The processing begins immediately. This is where the logistics we talked about in the first section become physical. The military needs to catalogue its new inventory. The girls are lined up outside a medical tent. One by one, they are called inside. Sunja enters. The air inside smells of antiseptic and stale sweat. A military doctor in a white coat stands with his back to her, washing his hands. He doesn't turn around. "Undress," he says. She hesitates. She is 16. "I said undress." A nurse, a stern-faced Japanese woman, rips Sunja's dress from her shoulders. She stands there, shivering, trying to cover herself with her arms. The exam is not medical. It is an inspection. The doctor checks her teeth. He checks her hair for lice. Then, he forces her onto a table. It is brutal, cold, and fast. He is checking for venereal disease. Not to treat her, but to ensure the product is clean for the first batch of customers. "Pass," he grunts. He stamps a piece of paper. Sunja scrambles to put her clothes back on, tears streaming down her face. She feels dirty, hollowed out. But the transformation isn't done. She is taken to a clerk at a wooden table. He takes her papers, her identification, her family registry, and throws them into a pile. "Name?" he asks. "Kim Sunja," she whispers. "No," he says, writing in a ledger. "That is a Korean name. You are Japanese now." He looks at a list. "Your name is Haruko." "But—" "Haruko!" he shouts. "Room 4, next." In that moment, Sunja ceases to exist. The girl who sang by the river, the girl who loved her mother, the girl with the red shoes, she is gone. In the eyes of the Imperial Army, she is now Haruko. She is a unit of supply. There is a slang term the Japanese soldiers use for the Korean women. You won't find it in the official documents, but you find it in the diaries. They call them chosun pai. It translates to Korean vagina. That is all she is to them, a biological function attached to a body that can be discarded when it breaks. Haruko is led to room 4. It is a tiny cubicle, barely 6 feet by 6 feet. There is a straw mat on the floor, a rough blanket, a small window with bars, and on the door, facing the outside, is a wooden placard with her new name painted on it. She sits on the mat. The walls are thin, plywood. Through the wall, she can hear the girl in room 3 crying. Night falls, the camp lights buzz to life, and then she hears it. The sound of heavy boots on gravel, lots of them, the sound of laughter, the sound of a queue forming. The door to room 4 rattles. Haruko pulls her knees to her chest. She squeezes her eyes shut. She tries to remember the sound of the wind in the rice paddies. She tries to remember her mother's voice. But all she can hear is the latch lifting. The door opens. A shadow fills the frame. The work has begun. Part Vi. The room. The sun rises over the camp. It is 6 a.m. For Haruko, formerly Sunja, the day doesn't begin with breakfast or a shower. It begins with the smell. It is a smell that survivors, 50 years later, would still wake up choking on, a mixture of cheap alcohol, stale sweat, blood, and cresol, the industrial disinfectant the army used to wash the floors. It's soaked into the wood. It's soaked into their clothes. It's soaked into their skin. Haruko sits up on her mat. Her body is a map of bruises. Her joints are swollen. She is 16, but she moves like a woman of 80. She has 10 minutes to clean her room. This is the irony of the Imperial Army. They demanded absolute hygiene in a slaughterhouse. She scrubs the floor. She arranges the wash basin. She straightens the blanket. At 7 a.m., a bell rings, or a whistle blows. It depends on the camp. But the sound is always the same. It signals the start of the shift. She opens her door. Outside, the line has already formed. On weekends, specifically Sundays, the lines are terrifying. They snake through the courtyard, out the gate, and into the tree line. Hundreds of men. The Sunday assault, they called it. Haruko stands in her doorway. She is not a person anymore. She is a service station. And to access her, the soldiers need a ticket. This is the most bureaucratic, soul-crushing part of the system. The army printed official tickets, like carnival passes or ration coupons, 1 yen for a private, 1.5 yen for an NCO, 2 yen for an officer. The soldiers would go to the front desk staffed by a civilian manager or a military clerk and buy their time. They would hand the ticket to Haruko as they entered the room. The managers told the girls, "Keep the tickets. If you collect enough, we will trade them for money, and you can buy your freedom." It was a lie. A cruel, mathematical lie. Haruko has a cigar box under her mat. It is filled with tickets, hundreds of them, paper scraps that represent hours of torture. She counts them at night, thinking she is earning her way back to Korea. But the managers never cash them out. When a girl asks for her money, she is beaten. When the unit moves, the tickets are confiscated. The tickets are not currency. They are receipts of a debt that can never be paid. The sheer volume of traffic is physically impossible to comprehend. One survivor, Kim Hak-sun, later testified to the United Nations. She said, "It was not humanly possible. I could not count them. But some days, it was 30 men. 30. 30. Let's do the math. If the station is open for 13 hours, and a soldier takes 30 minutes, the math doesn't work." The commanders knew this. So they shortened the time, 10 minutes, 5 minutes. Assault style. Haruko lies on the mat. She stares at the ceiling. There is a knot in the wood that looks like a bird. She stares at it for 12 hours a day. She learns to leave her body. She floats above the room, watching the girl on the mat, feeling nothing. If she fights, they break her jaw. If she cries, they beat her with the scabbard of a sword. If she refuses, they threaten to kill her family back in Daegu. So she endures. One ticket. Part BI, the magic shot. The human body is not designed for this. It tears. It bleeds. It becomes infected. Within weeks of arriving at the comfort station, almost every woman gets sick. Syphilis is rampant. Gonorrhea is as common as the cold. When Haruko notices the sores, terror grips her. She knows what happens to damaged units. She has seen girls dragged away behind the barracks and heard the single gunshot. She has seen others loaded onto trucks, told they're going to a hospital, and never seen again. She tries to hide it. But the weekly inspection is mandatory. The military doctor, let's call him Dr. Tanaka, sees the infection. He doesn't look sympathetic. He looks annoyed. A broken machine slows down the assembly line. But the army has a solution. A magic shot. The soldiers call it number 606. Give her the 606, Tanaka orders. A nurse approaches with a thick glass syringe. The needle is dull. She jams it into Haruko's arm or hip. The liquid burns like fire as it enters her veins. This will cure you, the nurse says. It is another lie. Salvarsan 606 arsphenamine is an arsenic-based compound. It was the primary treatment for syphilis before penicillin, but it is toxic, highly toxic, and the way the Imperial Army used it was criminal. They didn't use it to cure the women. A full cure took time and rest. They used it to suppress the symptoms. The 606 would dry up the sores, hide the rash, and make the woman appear healthy enough to work. But inside, the disease was still raging. And now, she was being poisoned by arsenic, too. The side effects were horrific. Hair loss, vomiting, liver failure, and, most devastating of all for young women who dreamed of one day having families, permanent sterility. The 606 destroyed their reproductive systems. It burned out their wombs. Haruko takes the shot. She feels sick for days, but the sores fade. She is marked fit for service. She returns to the room. The tickets pile up. The arsenic builds up in her blood. She is being hollowed out from the inside. Part VI, the diary of a monster. How did the men running this justify it? Did they know they were monsters? We don't have to guess. We have their diaries. The diary of a Japanese military doctor was discovered. He served in a comfort station in China. His writing is chilling not because it is angry, but because it is bored. October 14th, rainy. The road is muddy. Inspected 150 comfort women today. 12 were found to have syphilis. Ordered them removed. November 2nd. Rice supply is low. The women are complaining of hunger. It is annoying. They should be grateful they are not on the front lines. December 10th. A new shipment arrived. They are young. The soldiers are pleased. Morale has improved. There is no recognition of humanity, no patience, only shipments and inspections. He writes about the women the same way a mechanic writes about changing spark plugs in a Jeep. If the part is defective, throw it out. Get a new one. If they acknowledged the women were human daughters, sisters, mothers, they would have to shoot themselves. So they convinced themselves they were managing a hygiene system. Part IX. The unborn. But biology is stubborn. Despite the 606, despite the condoms which were often washed and reused until they broke, nature finds a way. Haruko misses her cycle. Her stomach begins to swell. A stomach. Pregnancy in a comfort station is a death sentence. A pregnant woman cannot work. She consumes food but generates no revenue. She is a liability. When the managers find out, there is no maternity leave. There is no compassion. There is the procedure. Sometimes, they force the women to take massive doses of quinine or mercury to induce a miscarriage. It was agony. The girls would writhe on the floor for days, bleeding out. If that didn't work, the doctors, the same ones who gave the 606, would perform surgery, without anesthesia. They called it cleaning the womb. It was butchery. Survivors have testified that they were strapped to tables, while doctors scraped them out with metal instruments. Many died from blood loss or infection right on the table. Their bodies were thrown into ditches behind the camp. Those who survived the surgery were given a few days to recover, just enough time for the bleeding to slow down. Then, the door opened. The ticket was handed over, and the work began again. Haruko survives the winter. She survives the syphilis. She survives the starvation. She survives the soldiers who beat her when they lose a battle. But the war is turning. It is 1944. The Americans are coming. The sound of artillery is getting closer. The supply trucks stop arriving. The rice runs out. The Japanese command issues a new order. It is a frantic, desperate order. They are preparing to retreat, but they cannot leave the evidence behind. They cannot let the Americans find 2,000 slave camps full of witnesses. The units have served their purpose. Now, they must be liquidated. Haruko hears the officers whispering. She sees them pouring gasoline on the documents. She sees them sharpening their swords. The tickets in her cigar box are worthless. The 606 has poisoned her blood. And now, the architects of hell are preparing their final act. The Great Erasure is about to begin. Part X. The Order. The wind changes in 1944. For years, the Imperial Army had been an unstoppable tide, sweeping across the Pacific. But now, the tide is receding. The Americans are island-hopping closer. The British are pushing back in Burma. The Soviets are massing on the border of Manchuria. In Tokyo, the High Command burns documents. In the field, the panic is palpable. And in the comfort stations, the atmosphere shifts from brutality to something even more dangerous: elimination. The officers know what they have done. They know that if the Allies capture these camps, the women will speak. They will tell the world about the units, about the 606 injections, about the ticket systems. This cannot happen. The honor of the Emperor is at stake. So, a new order circulates. It is rarely written down, transmitted instead through whispered briefings and coded telegrams. Retreat, but leave nothing behind. In military logistics, nothing usually means maps, ciphers, and weapons. But in the comfort system, nothing means Haruko. The women are no longer assets. They are evidence. And the Imperial Army knows exactly how to dispose of evidence. Part Z, the white dress deception. There is a famous photograph from the end of the war. You've probably seen it in history textbooks. It shows a group of Asian women, heavily pregnant, barefoot, looking terrified, being captured by American Marines on an island in the Pacific. The caption usually reads, "Captured Japanese nurses." As the Americans approached islands like Saipan and Okinawa, the Japanese commanders tried one final deception. They gave the comfort women Red Cross armbands. They gave them stolen nurse uniforms. They told them, if the Americans catch you, tell them you are medical staff. If you tell them the truth, they will rape and kill you. It was a psychological cage. Even in the face of liberation, the women were terrified to speak. But most women didn't get armbands. They got grenades. In the Truk Lagoon, now Chuk, a major Japanese naval base, the air raids began to shatter the concrete bunkers. The comfort women were herded into caves. The officers told them, "We are going to move you to a safer location." They loaded them onto trucks. They drove them to the edge of the cliffs or deep into the jungle. In Burma, near the town of Mogaung, a Japanese commander named Kitazawa filed a report that claimed the comfort women had committed mass suicide to avoid capture. Forensic evidence suggests otherwise. They were shot in the back. The logic was cold and absolute. A dead woman cannot testify at a war crimes tribunal. A dead woman cannot demand reparations. Part Z. The caves of Saipan. Let's go back to Haruko. She is no longer in the plywood shack. Her unit has been moved, retreated, pushed back as the front line collapsed. She is now on an island in the Pacific. The name doesn't matter to her. All that matters is the sound of the artillery. It never stops. The ground shakes day and night. The soldiers are starving. They have stopped buying tickets because they have no money, and honestly, they are too terrified to care. They look at the women now with resentment. Useless mouths, they call them. One evening, an officer enters the cave where the women are hiding. He is carrying a box. He opens it. Inside, there are small vials of liquid, potassium cyanide. "The enemy is coming," he says. His voice is shaking. "They are monsters. They will torture you. The Emperor commands you to die with honor. Drink this." The Gyokusai, the shattered jewel ideology, demanded that every Japanese citizen commit suicide rather than surrender. The military tried to force this ideology onto their Korean slaves. "Die with honor," he says to the women he kidnapped, raped, and tortured for 3 years. Some drink it out of fear. They foam at the mouth and die in agony on the cave floor. But Haruko doesn't drink. She looks at the vial. She remembers the red shoes. She remembers her mother. A spark of rage, buried under years of abuse, ignites in her chest. No, she smashes the vial against the wall. The officer draws his sword. But before he can strike, a shell hits the ridge above them. The ceiling of the cave collapses. Dust and darkness swallow everything. In other caves, on other islands, the end is louder. On the Ogasawara Islands, soldiers herded the women into a bunker. They didn't offer poison. They pulled the pins on hand grenades, threw them in, and barred the doors. The units were expended. Part C. The human shields. Not all commanders wasted ammunition on the women. Some found a tactical use for them in the final days. In the Philippines, during the desperate defense of Manila, retreating Japanese squads forced comfort women to walk in front of them as they crossed open fields. Human shields. They gambled that the American GIs wouldn't shoot unarmed women. Haruko, having survived the cave, finds herself dragged into the jungle. She is barefoot. Her feet are bleeding. A soldier walks behind her, the barrel of his Arisaka rifle pressed into her spine. "Walk," he hisses. She walks toward the American lines. Bullets snap through the leaves around her. She is a ghost walking through hell. She expects to die. She wants to die. But then, the soldier behind her falls. A sniper. She freezes. Silence. Then, voices. Loud, barking voices in a language she doesn't understand. English. Men in green uniforms emerge from the trees. They are huge. They hold weapons she has never seen. They point them at her. She remembers the officer's warning. They are monsters. They will kill you. She falls to her knees. She puts her hands over her head. She waits for the bullet. It doesn't come. A hand touches her shoulder. She flinches, screaming. "Easy, ma'am," a voice says. "It is soft. You're safe." She looks up. An American soldier offers her a canteen of water. She drinks. It is the first clean water she has tasted in 4 years. She looks at the soldier. He doesn't look at her with lust. He looks at her with pity. And that pity breaks her. She doesn't feel relief. She feels an overwhelming, crushing shame. She looks down at her body, scarred, diseased, used. She realizes she is alive. And she realizes she has no idea who she is anymore. Part XIV, the abandonment. Haruko was one of the lucky ones. She was found, but thousands of others were simply left. In China, as the Kwantung army collapsed, officers jumped onto the last planes and trains back to Tokyo. They left the comfort women locked in the barracks. Imagine that moment. The guards are gone. The gate is unlocked. You walk out into a country that hates you. You are in China. You are Korean. You speak Japanese. You are wearing Japanese clothes. The locals see you as a collaborator. They see you as a whore of the enemy. Thousands of women were stoned to death by angry mobs who mistook them for Japanese spies. Others starved to death on the roadside, trying to walk 2,000 miles back to a home that didn't exist anymore. Some were taken in by Chinese farmers, forced to marry men they couldn't speak to, just to survive. They lived the rest of their lives in silence, stranded in foreign villages, hiding their pasts. They were the ghosts of the empire. Japan surrendered on the 15th of August, 1945. The emperor went on the radio. The war was over. The soldiers went home. They became fathers, salarymen, politicians. They rebuilt Tokyo. They rebuilt their lives. But the women who survived the 606, the grenades, the starvation, and the long walk home, they returned to a society that didn't want them. In Korea, Confucian culture placed a supreme value on female chastity. A woman who had lost her virtue, even by force, was seen as damaged goods, a disgrace to her family. So Haruko returns to Daegu. She stands outside her mother's house. She still doesn't have the red shoes. She is wearing American Army surplus boots. She raises her hand to knock. Then she stops. She imagines the look in her mother's eyes, the shame, the questions. "What happened to you?" She lowers her hand. She turns around and walks away. She moves to a different city. She changes her name again. She never marries. She never has children. The 606 ensured that. She lives alone in a small room, washing dishes for a living. She buries Haruko. She buries Sanja. She becomes a shadow. And for 50 years, the world agrees to forget her. The Japanese government burns the remaining documents. They claim the comfort women were commercial prostitutes who worked voluntarily. The Korean government, eager for Japanese aid money, stays silent. The US government, needing Japan as an ally against communism, buries the reports. The Great Erasure is complete. The 70 units from the requisition order are gone. The history books are written without them. It worked. until the ghosts started to speak. Part XV, the ghosts in the kitchen. The war ended in 1945. But for the women, the war never ended. It just changed locations. It moved from the barracks of Burma to the kitchens of Seoul. It moved from the caves of Saipan to the small, dark rooms of Busan. Haruko, who has reclaimed her Korean name, let's call her Sunja, again is alive. She is 24 years old, but she is old. Her body aches when it rains. Her womb is empty, scarred by the 606 and the surgeon's knife. She lives in a world that wants to celebrate. Korea is free. The Japanese flags are torn down. The language is restored. People are dancing in the streets, but Sunja cannot dance. She cannot celebrate, because every time she sees a man in uniform, even a Korean one, she flinches. Every time she hears a loud noise, she is back in the 2x2 room. She carries a secret that weighs more than the chains she once wore. In post-war Korea, purity is everything. A woman's value is tied to her chastity. If the neighbors knew what happened to her, if they knew she had serviced hundreds of Japanese soldiers, they wouldn't see her as a victim of a war crime. They would see her as dirty. The Japanese called them comfort women. The Koreans called them hwanyangnyeon, homecoming women. It sounds poetic, but it is a slur. It implies a woman who slept with the enemy, a traitor. So, Sunja makes a choice made by thousands of survivors across Asia. She chooses silence. She invents a story. I worked in a factory, she tells her neighbors. I was a nurse, she tells her employer. I never married because my fiancé died in the war. She tells the few friends she makes. She builds a fortress of lies to protect the shred of dignity she has left. But the silence eats her alive. Imagine living for 50 years with a scream trapped in your throat. Imagine watching the news and seeing the Prime Minister of Japan visit the Yasukuni Shrine, the place where the souls of the men who raped you are enshrined as heroic spirits. Imagine hearing your own government shake hands with Japan in 1965, signing a treaty for economic aid while you are rotting in a rented room with no heating. In 1965, Japan paid Korea $800 million in grants and loans to settle all post-war claims. It was blood money. Did Sunja see a penny of it? No. The Korean dictator at the time, Park Chung-hee, used the money to build highways and steel mills. He buried the issue. He sacrificed the grandmothers to build the economy. The survivors were erased twice. First by the Japanese military. Most of them lived in extreme poverty, unable to hold steady jobs due to their physical injuries and PTSD. They died alone in cold rooms, their secrets dying with them. One by one, the witnesses were fading. The evidence was turning to dust. It seemed like the perfect crime. In another 10 years, they would all be dead, and the history books would be clean. Part XV, the crack in the wall. It is 1990. The Cold War is ending. The Berlin Wall has fallen. Democracies are rising in Asia. And with democracy comes a dangerous thing: voices. In Japan, a new generation of politicians is trying to whitewash the past. They want to rearm. They want to be a normal nation. In June 1990, a Japanese Socialist Party member asks the government a simple question. In the Diet Parliament, what is the government doing about the Korean military comfort women? The response from the Japanese government is swift, official, and infuriating. The comfort women were private business operators. The military had no involvement in their recruitment or management. Private business operators, no involvement. It was the same lie they had told for 40 years. But this time, in the age of satellite TV and global news, the lie travelled. It travelled across the sea. It travelled into a small, run-down apartment in Seoul. It travelled to the ears of Kim Hak-sun. Kim Hak-sun is 67 years old. She is tired. She has lived a life of pain, hiding her past from everyone, even her own family. She rents a small room. She struggles to pay for medicine. She watches the news report. She sees the Japanese official standing in his expensive suit, looking into the camera and denying she exists. He says, I was a business operator. He says, I chose this. He says the military didn't do it. Something inside her snaps. For 50 years, shame had kept her quiet. She thought her silence was the price of her dignity. But in that moment, she realizes that her silence is what allows them to lie. If she dies silent, the lie becomes the truth. She looks at her hands. They are wrinkled now, but she remembers when they were young. She remembers the day the soldiers dragged her into the truck. She remembers the smell of the 606. She is not a ghost. She is a witness.
She goes to a local women's organization. She walks in, a small, frail grandmother in a simple dress. The activists there are young, fiery, university-educated women fighting for democracy. They don't know who she is. "Can we help you, grandmother?" one asks. Kim Hak-sun takes a breath. It is the hardest breath she has ever taken. "I have something to say," she whispers. "I was there. August 14th, 1991. The press conference is small. The room is unassuming. There are microphones, cameras, reporters with notepads. They are expecting a political statement, a protest about wages or labor rights. Instead, they get an earthquake. Kim Hak-sun sits at the table. She looks terrified. Her hands are shaking so hard she has to clasp them together. To speak is to destroy her life. To speak is to admit to the world that she was defiled. In a conservative society like Korea, this is social suicide. But she leans into the microphone. "I am Kim Hak-sun," she says. Her voice is trembling, but it is clear. "I was a Japanese military comfort woman." The room goes silent. The cameras zoom in. "I heard the Japanese government say that they had no involvement, that it was private business." She pauses. She looks directly into the lens. She is looking at the official in the suit. She is looking at General Okamura. She is looking at the soldier who broke her ribs in 1943. "I am the living evidence." She starts to tell the story. She talks about the kidnapping, the trucks, the ticket system, the violence. She cries, not the polite, silent weeping of a victim, but the raw, ugly, heaving sobs of a woman who has held a tsunami inside her chest for half a century. "I thought I should not speak," she says, "but I cannot die like this. I must tell the truth before I close my eyes." That press conference didn't just make the news. It broke the spell. Across Korea, across China, across the Philippines, other grandmothers were watching. Women who had convinced themselves they were alone. Women who thought they were the only ones. They saw Kim Hak-sun. They saw her bravery. And they saw that the sky didn't fall. The world didn't mock her. The world wept with her. The phone lines at the women's organizations began to ring. "I was there too. Me too. I was in Taiwan. I was in Indonesia." The silence was over. The floodgates were open. The war of paper. Kim Hak-sun's testimony was powerful. It was emotional. It was undeniable. But the Japanese government had a defense ready. "It is tragic," they said. "We feel deep sympathy, but we need proof. Personal testimony is unreliable. Where are the documents? Where are the orders? We burned them all. We have no records of military involvement." They were betting on their own efficiency. They knew they had destroyed the archives in 1944. They knew a grandmother's memory couldn't stand up in a court of law against a government that demanded stamped official orders. The survivors were called liars. Conservative newspapers in Japan attacked Kim Hak-sun's character. They picked apart her timeline. They said she was senile. They said she was doing it for money. It seemed for a moment that the cover-up would hold. The lack of evidence was the shield that protected the Japanese government. But they forgot one thing. The Japanese military was a bureaucracy, and bureaucracies never successfully destroy everything. Enter Professor Yoshiaki Yoshimi. He is a Japanese historian, a man of conscience. He is watching the news, watching his government call these women liars, and he is sickened. He knows the Imperial Army. He knows they wrote everything down. He decides to go hunting. He doesn't go to the burnt archives in Tokyo. He goes to the library of the Self-Defense Agency, Japan's modern military. He suspects that when the Americans occupied Japan, they might have seized documents that were never returned, or that some low-level clerks might have saved copies of boring logistical reports. He spends days in the dusty stacks, digging, reading boring reports about rice shipments and uniform quotas. And then, just days before a major summit in January 1992, he finds it. It isn't a folder marked Top Secret Crimes. It is much more mundane. It is a series of daily activity logs from the military police in China. And there, in the handwriting of a military clerk from 1938, are the smoking guns. Document 1. A request from a lieutenant general asking for permission to transport comfort women using military vehicles. Document 2. A report on the construction of comfort stations. funded by the military budget. Document 3. Regulations signed by the Ministry of War on how to recruit women to prevent social problems. There it was, in black and white. Recruitment, transport, budget, management. It wasn't a private business. It wasn't rogue soldiers. The fingerprints of the Japanese state were all over the crime scene. Professor Yoshimi releases the documents to the Asahi Shimbun newspaper. The headline screams across Japan on January 11, 1992, "Military involvement in comfort women confirmed." The shield was shattered. The Japanese Prime Minister, Kiichi Miyazawa, was visiting Seoul 3 days later. He had planned to talk about trade. Instead, he was forced to apologize 8 times. The Kono Statement followed in 1993, where Chief Cabinet Secretary Yohei Kono officially admitted the military's role and offered sincere apologies and remorse. It felt like a victory. It felt like the truth had finally won. But if you think the story ends with an apology and a handshake, you don't understand the nature of power. You don't understand that for some men, admitting guilt is a weakness they cannot tolerate. The documents were out, the women were speaking, but the backlash was coming, and it would be uglier than the silence. The Wednesday demonstration. While the politicians argued over documents, the grandmothers took to the streets. On January 8, 1992, just before the Yoshimi documents were published, a small group of survivors and activists gathered in front of the Japanese embassy in Seoul. They didn't have weapons, they had signs, they had a megaphone. They demanded an official apology, not remorse, not sympathy, a legal admission of guilt and reparations. They stood there for an hour, they chanted, they sang, then they said, "We will come back next week," and they did, and the week after that, and the week after that. They called it the Wednesday demonstration. Winter came. The wind in Seoul is brutal. It cuts through bone. The grandmothers, now in their 70 and 80, stood in the snow wrapped in blankets, holding pictures of their younger selves. Summer came. The heat was suffocating. They stood in the rain. They became a symbol, a living monument. But they were dying. Every year there were fewer chairs at the demonstration. Grandmother Kang died of lung disease. Grandmother Moon died of heart failure. Grandmother Kim Hak-sun, the woman who started it all, passed away in 1997. Before she died, she grabbed the hand of a young activist. Her eyes were fierce. "Don't let them wait us out," she said. "That is their strategy. They are waiting for the last of us to die, because when we are gone, they can rewrite the history books again." She was right. As the 1990 turned into the 2000, a new wave of nationalism swept through Japan. A movement called the Nippon Kaigi began to gain power. They argued that the Kono Statement was a mistake. They argued that the comfort women were just prostitutes who made a lot of money. They argued that Japan should be proud of its history, not ashamed. They started removing references to comfort women from Japanese school textbooks. They started sending hate mail to the survivors. They started a war on memory. And the survivors, frail and dying, realized that their testimony wasn't enough. Words fade. People forget. They needed something permanent, something that couldn't be bullied, something that couldn't be waited out. They needed bronze. The Girl Who Never Grows Old on December 14, 2011, the 1000th Wednesday demonstration. A truck pulled up in front of the Japanese embassy in Seoul. The police were nervous. The Japanese diplomats were watching from the windows. A crane lowered a bronze figure onto the sidewalk directly facing the embassy gates. It is a statue of a girl. She is small, wearing traditional Korean dress. She has short, jagged hair, representing how the girls were cut off from their families and culture. Her hands are clenched in fists on her lap, showing her resolve. But look at her feet. Her heels are lifted slightly off the ground. She is on her tiptoes. It symbolizes that she cannot walk comfortably on the earth. She belongs neither to the past nor the future. She is floating in trauma, unable to settle. And next to her, there is an empty chair. It is an invitation. It says, "Sit here. Sit beside me. Feel what I feel." This is the statue of peace. But it is not peaceful. It is an act of defiance cast in metal. It stares at the embassy 24 hours a day. When the diplomats drive out in their limousines, they have to look her in the eye. When they sleep at night, she is outside, watching. Japan was furious. They called it an insult to their dignity. They demanded it be removed. They threatened trade sanctions. They recalled their ambassador. Think about the absurdity of that moment. One of the world's largest economies, a G7 nation, terrified of a bronze statue of a teenage girl. Why? Because statues don't die. They knew the grandmothers were fading. They knew that in 10 years there would be no more Kim Hak-suns to hold press conferences. But the girl in bronze? She will never age. She will never get tired. She will never be silenced. She is the permanent witness. The billion-yen betrayal. The statue worked. It brought the issue back to the global stage. But in 2015, politics struck back. The United States was worried. They needed Japan and Korea to be friends to counter the rise of China and North Korea. They pressured both governments, fix this, make it go away. So, on December 28, 2015, the foreign ministers of Japan and Korea announced a breakthrough. Japan agreed to pay 1 billion yen, about $8.3 million, to a foundation for the survivors. In exchange, Korea agreed to consider the matter finally and irreversibly resolved and promised to try to remove the statue. Finally and irreversibly. The words hit the survivors like a slap in the face. They found out about the agreement on the news. No one had asked them. No one had invited them to the negotiations. Grandmother Lee Yong-soo, one of the fiercest survivors, stood before the cameras. She was 88 years old. She slammed her hand on the table. "We are not begging for money," she screamed. "Do you think we are selling our dignity for 1 billion yen? We want an admission of legal responsibility. We want them to say it was a crime, not a charity case." They rejected the money. They rejected the agreement. "You cannot sell our pain," she said. "It is not yours to sell." The agreement failed. The people of Korea rallied around the grandmothers. Students started camping out next to the statue, sleeping in sleeping bags in sub-zero temperatures to protect it from being removed by the police. The statue stayed, but the clock was ticking louder now. The end of the generation. We are in the final chapter of this tragedy. Not the narrative chapter, but the literal one. In 2016, there were 46 survivors registered with the Korean government. In 2018, there were 28. In 2020, there were 18. Today, in 2023, there are only 9. Check the date. The numbers drop every month. The funeral processions are constant, the white flowers. The hearse is moving slowly through the streets of Seoul, passing the statue one last time. Each death is a library burning down. Each death is a witness lost. When grandmother Kim Bok-dong died in 2019, she was blind in one eye and fighting cancer. She had spent her entire life's savings, money she received from donations, to fund scholarships for children in war zones. "I am not a victim," she used to say. "I am a human rights activist." On her deathbed, she didn't ask for revenge. She asked for peace. She asked that no woman in any war ever have to suffer what she suffered. And this brings us back to the document we started with. The 70 units. The men who wrote that document are dead. The soldiers who used those tickets are dead. And soon, the women who were the units will all be gone. So, who is left? The shadow. Go back to the statue. Look closely at the ground. There is a mosaic on the pavement behind the girl. It is the shadow of the statue. But the shadow is not of a young girl. It is the silhouette of an old woman hunched over. It represents the time that was stolen. The girl in the chair is forever frozen in 1937, but the shadow is the reality of the 50 years of silence, the pain, the aging body. But look closer still. Inside the chest of the old woman's shadow there is a white butterfly. In Korean culture, the butterfly represents reincarnation, the spirit breaking free. The message is clear. They tried to turn them into units. They tried to turn them into ghosts. They tried to erase them from the history books, but they failed. The units became the most powerful voices for women's rights in the 20th century. They changed international law. Because of them, rape in war is now prosecuted as a crime against humanity, not just collateral damage. They didn't just survive, they evolved. They became the conscience of the world. The empty chair. The bell of St. Catherine's Convent, the one we imagined in the sample script, has stopped ringing. The 606 injections have turned to dust. The barracks are rotting in the jungles of Indonesia, but the chair next to the statue is still empty. It is waiting for you. History is not a collection of facts. It is a burden of memory. When the last survivor takes her final breath, the burden passes to us. We become the witnesses. It is our job to remember the 70 units. It is our job to remember the red shoes. It is our job to remember the blacked-out windows and the two rooms. Because if we forget, if we let the textbooks be rewritten, if we let the statues be taken down, then we are finishing the work that General Okamura started in 1937. We are completing the erasure. Don't let them disappear. Japan has beautiful cherry blossoms. It has towering skyscrapers and bullet trains. It has a culture of honor and politeness. But a true honor is not about hiding your sins. It is about facing them. Until that happens, the girl in bronze will keep sitting there, watching, waiting, her heels lifted, her fists clenched, and the empty chair will wait for someone brave enough to sit in it and say, I remember. Lux in tenebris lucet. The light shines in the darkness. And this time, the darkness did not overcome it.